Good morning, philosophers. We're going to continue today with letter 18. Is it the month of December, and yet the whole city is in a sweat? Festivity at state expense is given unrestricted license. Everywhere there echoes the noise of preparations on a massive scale. It all suggests that the Saturnalia, holidays, are different from the ordinary working day, when the difference is really non-existent. So much so, in fact, that the man who said that December used to be a month but is now a year was, in my opinion, not far wide of the mark. If I had you with me, I should enjoy consulting you and finding out what course you think we should follow. Should we make no alteration in our daily habits, or should we take off our togas? Time was when a change from formal wear would come about only during periods of grave political upheaval, whereas with us it happens for holidays and pleasure's sake. I have dinner parties with a note of gaiety about them, to avoid giving the impression that we disagree with the ways of those around us. Oh, and have dinner parties. Let me make sure I read that properly. Oh, it's weird because it's one long sentence. Starting with if I had you with me. Wow. Okay. If I know you as well as I think I do, and you had to give a decision in the matter, you would say that we should be neither altogether like nor altogether unlike the festive hatted crowd. But perhaps this is the very season when we should be keeping the soul under strict control, making it unique in abstaining from pleasure just when the crowd are all on pleasure bent. If the soul succeeds in avoiding either heading or being carried away in the direction of the temptations that lead people into extravagant living, no surer proof of its strength of purpose can be... Okay, I've never seen this word before in my life. Vouchsafed? V-O-U-C-H-S-A-F-E-D? Time to look up another word. Vouchsafed. Oh my God, it's a word. To condescend, to grant or bestow. To disclose or reveal. Vouchsafe. Huh. Okay.
Vouchsafe.
Vouchsafe. All right. Interesting. Let me try that again. No surer proof of its strength of purpose can be vouchsafed it. Remaining dry and sober takes a good deal more strength of will when everyone about one is puking drunk. It takes a more developed sense of fitness, on the other hand, not to make of oneself a person apart, to be neither indistinguishable from those about one, nor conspicuous by one's difference. To do the same things, but not in quite the same manner. For a holiday can be celebrated without extravagant festivity. Still, my determination to put your moral strength of purpose to the test is such that I propose to give even you the following direction found in great men's teaching. Set aside now and then a number of days during which you will be content with the plainest of food, and very little of it, and with rough, coarse clothing, and will ask yourself, is this what one used to dread? This is kind of like a call to fasting, or the kind of things that we were talking about when we were reading more equal animals. Changing things up in your life, testing out the rough times. It is in times of security that the spirit should be preparing itself to deal with difficult times. While fortune is bestowing favors on it, then it is the time for it to be strengthened against her rebuffs. In the midst of peace, the soldier carries out maneuvers, throws up earthworks against a non-existent enemy, and tires himself out with unnecessary toil in order to be equal to it when it is necessary. If you want a man to keep his head when the crisis comes, you must give him some training before it comes. This was the aim of the men who once every month pretended they were poor, bringing themselves face to face with want, to prevent their ever being terrified by a situation which they had frequently rehearsed. I love that. That is amazing advice. You must not at this point imagine that I mean meals like Timon's or, quote, the poor man's room, or anything else to which the extravagance of wealth resorts to amuse away its tedium. That palate must be a real one, and the same applies to your smock, and your bread must be hard and grimy. Endure all this for 3 or 4 days at a time, sometimes more, so that it is a genuine trial and not an amusement. At the end of it, believe me, Lucilius, you will revel in being sated for a penny, and will come to see that security from care is not dependent on fortune. For even when she is angry, she will always let us have what is enough for our needs. There is no reason, mind you, why you should suppose yourself to be performing a considerable feat in doing this. You will only be doing something done by thousands upon thousands of slaves and paupers. But take credit on one account, that you will be doing it of your own free choice, and finding it no more difficult to endure on a permanent basis than to try out once in a while. We should be practicing with a dummy target, getting to be at home with poverty so that fortune cannot catch us unprepared. We shall be easier in our minds when rich if we have come to realize how far from burdensome it is to be poor. The great hedonist teacher Epicurus used to observe certain periods during which he would be niggardly in satisfying his hunger, with the object of seeing to what extent, if at all, one thereby fell short of attaining full and complete pleasure, and whether it was worth going to much trouble to make the deficit good. At least so he says in the letter he wrote to Polyaenus in the year Charinus was in office. He boasts in it indeed that he is managing to feed himself for less than the halfpenny, whereas Metrodorus, not yet having made such good progress, needs a whole halfpenny. Do you think such fare can do no more than fill a person up? It can fill him with pleasure as well, and not the kind of insubstantial, fleeting pleasure that needs constant renewal, but a pleasure which is sure and lasting. Barley porridge, or a crust of barley bread, and water do not make a very cheerful diet, but nothing gives one keener pleasure than the ability to derive pleasure even from that, and the feeling of having arrived at something which one cannot be deprived of by any unjust stroke of fortune. Prison rations are more generous. The man in the condemned cell is not so scantily fed as that by the executioner. To reduce oneself, then, of one's own free choice to a diet that no man has any real call to be apprehensive about, even if he is sentenced to death, that is an act of real spiritual greatness. To do this is truly to forestall the blows of fortune. So, my dear Lucilius, start following these men's practice and appoint certain days on which to give up everything and make yourself at home with next to nothing. Start cultivating a relationship with poverty. Quote, Dear guest, be bold enough to pay no heed to riches, and so make yourself like him worthy of a god. End quote. For no one is worthy of a god unless he has paid no heed to riches. I am not, mind you, against your possessing them, but I want to ensure that you possess them without tremors, and this you will only achieve in one way, by convincing yourself that you can live a happy life, even without them, and by always regarding them as being on the point of vanishing. But it's time I started folding up this letter. Not till you've settled your account, you say? Well, I'll refer you to Epicurus for payment. Quote, Anger carried to excess begets madness. End quote. How true this is you're bound to know, having had both slaves and enemies. It is a passion, though, which flares up against all types of people. It is born of love as well as hate, and is as liable to arise in the course of sport or jesting as in affairs of a serious kind. The factor that counts is not the importance of the cause from which it springs, but the kind of personality it lands in. In the same way as with fire, what matters is not the fierceness of the flame, but where it catches. Solid objects may resist the fiercest flame, while conversely dry and inflammable matter will nurse a mere spark into a conflagration. It is true, my dear Lucilius. The outcome of violent anger is a mental raving, and therefore anger is to be avoided not for the sake of moderation, but for the sake of sanity. Letter 25? No, 26. Getting some practice reading Roman numerals. It's only a short time since I was telling you I was in sight of old age. Now, I'm afraid I may have left old age behind me altogether. Some other term would be more in keeping now with my years, or at least my present physical state, since old age connotes a period of decline, not debility. Put me in the list of the decrepit, the ones on the very brink. However, I congratulate myself, mind you, on the fact that my age has not, so far as I'm aware, brought any deterioration in my spirit, conscious as I am of the deterioration in my constitution. Only my vices and their accessories have decayed. The spirit is full of life, and delighted to be having only limited dealings with the body. It has thrown off a great part of its burden. It's full of vigor and carrying on an argument with me on the subject of old age, maintaining that these are its finest years. Let's accept what it says and let it make the most of its blessings. It tells me to start thinking and examine how far I owe this serenity and sobriety to philosophy, and how far I owe it simply to my years, and to investigate with some care what things I really am refusing to do and what I'm simply incapable of doing. And it's prepared to accept whatever I'm really pleased to find myself incapable of doing as equivalent to refusing to do them. And what cause can there be for complaint, after all, in anything that was always bound to come to an end, fading gradually away? What's troubling about that? Nothing, you may say, could be more troubling than the idea of our wasting and perishing away, melting out of existence, one may aptly call it. Since we aren't struck down all of a sudden, but worn away, every day that passes diminishing in some degree our powers. Moving to one's end through nature's own gentle process of dissolution. Is there a better way of leaving life than that? Not because there is anything wrong with a sudden violent departure, but because this gradual withdrawal is an easy route. I don't know. Anyway. Here's what I do. I imagine to myself that the testing time is drawing near, that the day that is going to see judgment pronounced on the whole of my past life has actually arrived, and I take a look at myself and address myself in these terms, quote, "All that I have done or said up to now counts for nothing. My showing to date, beside being heavily varnished over, is of paltry value and reliability as a guarantee of my spirit. I'm going to leave it to death to settle what progress I've made. Without anxiety, then, I'm making ready for the day when the tricks and disguises will be put away, and I shall come to a verdict on myself, determining whether the courageous attitudes I adopt are really felt or just so many words, and whether or not the defiant challenges I've hurled at fortune have been mere pretense and pantomime. Away with the world's opinion of you. It's always unsettled and divided. Away with the pursuits that have occupied the whole of your life. Death is going to deliver the verdict in your case. Yes, all your debates and learned conferences, your scholarly talk and collection of maxims from the teachings of philosophers, are in no way indicative of genuine spiritual strength. Bold words come even from the timidest. It's only when you're breathing your last that the way you've spent your time will become apparent. I accept the terms and feel no dread of the coming judgment. That's what I say to myself. But assume that I've said it to you as well. You're younger than I am, but what difference does that make? No count is taken of years. Just where death is expecting you is something we cannot know. Just where death is expecting you is something we cannot know. So, for your part, expect him everywhere. I was just intending to stop my hand considering its closing sentence, but the accounts have still to be made out in this letter issued with its traveling expenses. You may assume... Wow. Yeah, letters needed traveling expenses. Wow. Never thought about that. You may assume that I won't be announcing the source I intend borrowing from. You know whose funds I'm drawing on. Give me a fraction more time and payment will be made out of my own pocket. In the meantime, Epicurus will oblige me with the following, saying, quote, rehearse death. Or, the idea may come across to us rather more satisfactorily if put in this form, quote, it is a very good thing to familiarize oneself with death. It is a good day to die. You may possibly think it unnecessary to learn something which you will only have to put into practice once. That is the very reason why we ought to be practicing it. We must needs continually study a thing if we are not in a position to test whether we know it. Rehearse death. To say this is to tell a person to rehearse his freedom. A person who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. He is above, or at any rate beyond the reach of all political powers. What are prison warders' bars to him? He has an open door. There is but one chain holding us in fetters, and that is our love of life. But there is no need to cast this love out altogether, but it does need to be lessened somewhat, so that, in the event of circumstances ever demanding this, nothing may stand in the way of our being prepared to do at once what we must do at some time or other. I like the rehearsing his freedom line. I'm going to have to think a lot on that today, I think. All right, that concludes that letter. We'll pick up with letter XXVII next time. That's 17, right? No, 27. 27. All right, guys. What was I thinking about? Oh, I'm constantly getting comments on the growing body of videos that I've made now. I'd have to count, but I think I'm approaching like 1,000 videos over the years. And the number of comments that I get every day is way beyond my capacity to ever meaningfully engage with them all at this point. Add to that the feedback I get on Discord and the Matrix server and excuse me, and all the social medias and the Telegram group. There's way more incoming communication than I have time for outbound, or that I should rationally want to engage in. And so I have to have I've developed standards for what gets a response and what gets ignored, because most of it just deserves ignoring, especially a lot of the negative stuff. But the negative stuff still is important to me. It's just certain types of negative feedback are important, and knowing the line about which to disregard and which to take more seriously and examine requires thought and having standards. And this has taught me, so learning this in relation to social media and in engaging with the mass general anonymous public has also really been good for negative feedback in real life as well. If somebody I care about is giving me negative feedback, I still subject it to the same sort of tests. Number one, and I haven't fully thought this through yet, so that's what I'm going to think today, but I would say the rough draft of it is probably some inverse of what I have worked out to be a true apology, what I consider to be a true apology, which is admission, contrition. I think it's 4. Oh man, see, I'm just waking up. Admission, contrition, restitution, and reconfiguration. I think it's 4. So that's, you admit you did wrong, you show remorse about it, you do what you can to make it better, and then you change your behavior so that the thing that you did wrong won't happen again, and you show that change in behavior to the person that you wronged. And I suspect that like negative feedback should also somehow follow that in a way, but it needs to say what you did wrong. It needs to say why it was wrong. The helpful kind of feedback will include, if it was wrong, how you can make it better and how you can change your behavior in the future, right? So like, if those are the 4 sort of pieces of information I look for in negative feedback, I think that's a good rubric. And you can tell just from that short description, this is running long, so I'll make this brief. But what I'm thinking about today is I get a lot of negative feedback as well as positive, but most of the negative feedback is empty. It's vapid, it's worthless, it's either trolling or it's just people expressing their feels that they allowed me to trigger in them, or that they triggered in themselves upon watching my content or reading my words. And sometimes the responses involving them expressing their triggered feels is long and quite involved, and so it gives it the air of some substance. I'm just rambling at this point, but I guess what I'm trying to say is think about your standards for what feedback needs to be before you waste time on it. Not waste, before you spend time considering it, before you engage with it genuinely. Number 1, it's going to eliminate a lot of worthless feedback and save you a ton of time and a ton of stress. And then the ones that meet those standards, those will be the important ones that will actually do you well to spend time on and focus on. And really quickly, and maybe this ought to be a full video on disenthrall. I think this is some good advice, but have the same kind of thing for your beliefs. Spend some time thinking about your standards that you require to believe something is true. And then when people send you information, run them up against your standards and realize that there are 3 positions: active belief, active disbelief, and I don't know. And oftentimes I don't know is a good one. And the standard of evidence to either achieve I know or that's not true are much higher than most people, I think, make them, and should be much higher than most people certainly make them. Anyway. All right, guys. Have a good day.